So this is basically Korean Warframe mixed with Destiny and a sprinkle of Anthem and Outriders with plenty of fan service thrown in, right? Bunny and Valby. And hanging over it is the cloud of Nexon and its history of terrible microtransactions added in for good measure. Now that's pretty much how most players have been describing the First Descendant's open beta to me over on stream, and frankly they're not wrong. Long video ahead with a fair amount of hope but also criticism, but it comes from a good place. I want this game to be successful and looters are my thing. I want another one that I can pop into my rotation, so get comfy. Now let me just double down on this point first. I have enjoyed the First Descendant's open beta a lot for what it is, a test of a new looter, something different for me to dip my toes into for a few days away from my usual grinds. But what about longevity? After 3 days of playing it, I will admit I was already bored, but that's more to do with the lack of content because it is a beta, right? It's not the full game, so there is a lot missing. Is this a game that will have enough going for it to last long enough, or is it just another looter shooter destined to fail after that initial honeymoon period is over? Now, my opinion is pretty much that this still needs a lot of work, and I will hopefully get it over the next few months before it is eventually released, because it is the closest that we've come to a looter similar to the ones that we already play, probably because it has all of those games rolled into one and it has all of those systems, but it needs to be popped back in the oven and worked on a lot more, or it will just follow the pattern of previously released looters: hype, release, honeymoon period, and then die off after a few months. Now, the first thing I want to mention is microtransactions, right? I'm just going to rip the band-aid off because it is Nexon who have got a history, there's no one going to deny that, and that's always been the biggest talking point of this game. The developers have mentioned how they want to keep it light on microtransactions and they want to imitate similar games in the looter shooter genre by having them mostly used for skins, that word mostly. But in the beta there was already signs of a heavy microtransaction system in place with skippable build times for Descendants, each of their 4 parts, and weapons, which would allow you to spend real money currency, which is very similar to Warframe. Now the resource requirements to build these, however, seemed pretty damn high, which will have an enticement towards spending real money instead of going through all of that grind. Now obviously it's not just skins, I would also expect some form of boosters, whether resource or experience. There is also the Ultimate Descendants, which is their version of primed frames, which will more than likely come in some sort of a bundle. Buying Descendants outright was a thing in the open beta. There was also 4 different currencies and 2 separate stores in the town hub, which is a bit of a red flag right away because games that normally have multiple currencies like this, when it comes to 4 of them at least, means that the game will have some kind of currency exchange between those 4 currencies, and the exchange rate is normally pretty unbalanced. Now, there is warning signs for microtransactions, and even if they're light on microtransactions to begin with, I've been told that Nexon have got a history of adding more microtransactions a year or so after release. Now, I've streamed it for multiple days and hit 40 on I think 5 or 6 characters now, and the gunplay, the movement, and the use of abilities from the Descendants has been really good. Probably the best thing about the game. Their abilities and the character design for each Descendants just feels well made. Freyna's use of her abilities, or constant use because she seems to need to use them a lot, I really enjoyed. The same goes for Valby and her water pools, and those laundry debuffs, definitely a mistranslation. But the game's optimization, this beta has definitely gone downhill compared to the beta 10 or 11 months ago. The game's audio seems to fluctuate all over the place with certain weapons, some of them being much louder than others. The same goes for some of the special effects and the explosions. Now, the open world area for each zone is completely devoid of all life. Dead. No wildlife, no random enemies patrolling, no ambient sounds whatsoever. Valby could fart in her water suit and you'd hear it across the map. They've built these zones and they've gone and put nothing in them whatsoever. So each open zone basically has multiple Destiny-styled missions where you will interact with a floating node and then it will start a mission. Only then will enemies spawn in and you will follow the objectives to complete the mission. Now, the massive Void Intercept battles also felt pretty good. Having to focus on breaking their parts or hitting weak points is a common mechanic for Behemoth or Monster style fighters, and giving them weaknesses to certain elements or less resistance to certain elements is right out of Monster Hunter's playbook. But I really wish these battles weren't in a simulated area like a simulacrum from Warframe, and that they were out in an open world zone with buildings being knocked over instead of this black inky walls everywhere. But again, the combat felt really good. So the combat feeling really good is the main takeaway from most players who have experienced the open beta, unless you're up against 7 or 8 trackers, in which case, good night, you're dead. Whoever thought adding those into the game was a good idea needs to be drop-kicked into the sun. Now, even though the combat feels good, it would be fake of me if I didn't point out how this game, still 11 or 10 months after the first closed beta, still seems to lack any real sense of an actual identity, its own thing. It's visually beautiful, Unreal Engine 5, so it's going to look great on that front, but almost everything in this game is either a direct copy or heavily influenced by other looters in the same genre, which would be fine if they had their own thing holding it together, but they don't. Warframe, Destiny, Outriders, Anthem, Monster Hunter, the list goes on. Some of them looters. The similarities are almost impossible to ignore, so I'm not going to, and I know other players aren't either. It's basically taken some of the better systems from our favourite looter shooters and put them into this game, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. In fact, I think it's probably the opposite, because it allows you to understand the game faster and its mechanics and its systems, but it has nothing to make it its own identity, if you know what I mean. Hopefully you do. Now take Warframe's modding system for example. In the First Descendant it is called the modular system, and it's the main power source for your descendants and your weapons. This is what will increase your potential damage or survivability. These mods can come complete with polarities. They also fill a capacity on your descendants, so each one has a cost once you equip it. Matching a mod's symbol to its corresponding symbol on your descendant or weapon will reduce that capacity cost. It's basically Warframe's modding system, just with a different name and a really clunky UI. A UI that looks like it's straight out of Warframe from nearly 8-9 years ago. It's an absolute mess. It's been one of the biggest talking points outside of the worry of microtransactions that the UI still looks like Anthem, with badly translated descriptions, tooltips, stats not changing when you equip a mod and making you having to back out of the mod screen and then go back in with the mod already equipped in order to see which stats have changed. So it is rough and it does need work, but a lot of these things are quality of life changes that are hopefully easily fixed. Now you can also reset your descendants level once you hit maximum level, which right now is 40. This will allow you to spend a resource that inserts a new symbol into your chosen descendant, basically Warframe's former system, just with a different name. Classes are called descendants, but there is also an ultimate version of the same descendant that comes with slightly better stats. It's basically the prime version of Warframe's. Like a lot of looters, it has defense missions where you will defend an objective from being destroyed. It has mine blocking missions where you will have to survive against waves of increasingly difficult enemies. It has an extraction style mission where you have to defend an objective while picking up other items and bringing them to the objective in order to power up that bar. There's a mission where you escort a drone and this drone will drain your shield in order to move the drone along. You get the idea, right? Korean Warframe. It does look like the game will have a lot of build diversity between each descendant and weapons, and will require you to own multiple different weapons due to, I guess, damage weaknesses being different against each faction and against each behemoth. So you don't stick to the same weapon all the time. It's going to force you to change, and the same goes for the descendants. Some will shine in certain void intercept behemoth battles and others won't, so you're going to have to constantly chop and change, and there is, like I said, a lot of build diversity. Now we know there is also a lot of legendary or exotic weapons that have their own special passives, and more than likely some of these we have seen and some we haven't, and chances are these will continue to alter your builds and change how you perform or what kind of damage you throw out. But from what I did experience with the descendants this time around, Valby and Freyna were the ones I enjoyed the most in this beta, whereas last time I think it was Jabba, the turret guy. Same goes for Viessa, who could be a pretty tanky descendant. Kyle was seriously powerful. Gley, the vampire, was still busted as all hell with her ultimate. The damage she can throw out was insane. In fact, there's videos all over the place of Gley melting some of those behemoths in the void intercept battles nearly all by herself. Now, whether she stays like that for full release or not, I doubt it. Now, I know I'm nitpicking here, but some of the Descendants' abilities do bear a striking resemblance to abilities taken from a lot of the looters we have played over the last few years, whether they're taken from the Outriders Trickster, Bubble, or Thundercrash Titans in Destiny, Warframe abilities, which isn't a bad thing. I mean, a lot of games have abilities like this, but when you combine all of these with every other similar system in the First Descendant, it just looks like they've copied homework. Outriders or Anthem's UI, Warframe's modding system complete with build times, former items, prime frame variants, mastery rank, you get the idea. Again, I've enjoyed the game, but it still feels like it is lacking, and if special operations and void intercept battles are what this game has to offer in endgame, which I hope it doesn't, I hope there is a lot more to show, then I would think before dedicating my time to it. But let me know in the comment section below what you think of the First Descendants if you jumped into the open beta. Like I said, this criticism comes from a good place. I want this game to be successful, and while the combat is really enjoyable and it's the best part about the open beta, the other systems still need a lot of work.